When the subject of the meaning of life comes up, how many people automatically think 42? Right, how many people have got no idea what 42 has got to do with it? But the first question we need to ask, of course, is, does life have a meaning? Is there any meaning to life? Is there any point to existence, to my existence or to existence of anything? Is there any purpose to life? Now, in my not-so-expert opinion, probably two of the most important or significant works of English literature of the 20th century are Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And I know there are plenty of real experts who agree with my first choice. I sincerely doubt there are any who agree with my second. If you haven't read it, I can strongly recommend the 3 books of the trilogy. There are actually 5 books in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. Yes, 5 in a trilogy. The last 2 are rubbish because Douglas Adams, the author, specifically made them rubbish because the first 3 were so successful the publishers kept pressuring him to write more. And he didn't want to keep doing it, so he wrote deliberate rubbish to try and put them off, which worked after the 5th one.
Then he died, that was even more of a stop.
Yeah. No more after he died. That didn't stop talking though, he wrote more after he died. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is supposedly about a book entitled Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And yeah, it's the same title. The one that he wrote about was written and published on some planet out there in space somewhere. And it is basically a travel guide for people who want to travel the galaxy on the cheap. And if you get hold of one of these books and open it up, on the first page you will see these words. I'll ignore all the good stuff. Getting to this particular point, there's lots of stuff really worth reading, and the way Adams puts it is really good. But nevertheless, our hero finds himself on the planet of Magrathea. And on this planet, he is told a story and shown the futuristic equivalent of a video featuring events of the past, in which a race of super intelligent pan-dimensional beings, and super intelligent means they're a lot smarter than us, pan-dimensional means they live in more than just the 3 space dimensions that we live in. They got to pondering this question of the meaning of life. And so they designed and built the greatest possible computer of all time. They named their computer Deep Thought, and they programmed it with all of their knowledge and wisdom and set it to work on the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Once they got it started, its circuits were irrevocably committed to this task. And 7.5 million years later, the descendants many generations later of those who had originally programmed a Deep Thought were on hand to receive the answer. And Deep Thought finally got there and whirred back into life and spoke to them and told them the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. The answer is 42. And the way Adams puts it is a whole lot better than the way I've just done it, and you really need to read the book to get the effect, but that takes a whole lot longer than my brief little discussion here. But the thing is, once they knew the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, they kind of realised that they didn't really know the question. What is the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything? And you read through the books, and this kind of goes on through the books. And eventually, about 2/3 of the way through the 3rd book, they finally discover that the question and the answer are mutually exclusive. You can know the question, or you can know the answer, but you cannot know both. And that's kind of how it ended, so far as that question is concerned. But the thing is, I believe I know what the question is. The ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is, why are we here? And the answer is not 42. So this is the central question of life, of our existence. It is fundamental to sentient life. This race of super intelligent pan-dimensional beings were so committed to finding the answer to this that they built that computer, then they built another one that was supposed to last for another 10 million years to try and work stuff out, because it's so important. It is central to who we are, to who we want to be. There is this primal need in each and every one of us to have a meaning and a purpose to our existence. Something outside of me, something bigger than me to give me a meaning. If the question abides, it is because it is more than a matter of historical or biographical interest. Our pursuit of meaning and the consequences should we come up empty-handed are matters of eternal immediacy, according to Robert Zaretsky. Viktor Frankl spent most of World War II as a prisoner in a concentration camp. He came to understand a thing or two about suffering, about hardship. And he wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud believed, or a quest for power, as Alfred Adler taught, but a quest for meaning. The great task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life." Is there an answer? Is there real purpose and meaning? If so, what is it? And if not, then what does that mean? Our culture is all about me because I am worth it. It's about getting stuff, having a good time, doing whatever I want, whatever makes me happy. My rights, my needs, my wants, me. But we find that just doesn't work. So we grab whatever we can to try and cover that up. And the very small number of people who have achieved all the stuff that they wanted still find themselves empty because it doesn't do it for them. This is not just an academic question. It goes to the heart of our existence. It is vitally and centrally important to each and every one of us. Our two fundamental needs are for security and significance. Security encompasses things like air, food, water, shelter, and everything else we can think of that fits under that category. Once those basic needs are covered, then our need for significance rises up and grabs us by the throat. And that includes need for meaning for our lives, a purpose to exist, to be loved, to be important to at least one other person. Life is pretty miserable if we haven't got that, and we search for it. It is once those basic security needs are met, the needs for significance become all-encompassing. This, for example, is why some young people get caught up in gangs, because that's something bigger than them, something they can give themselves that can provide a bit of meaning, or so they hope. And have you ever wondered how some of these young Muslims in Australia throw everything in and travel halfway across the world? Australia is this place that people get in rickety boats and risk their lives travelling across vast oceans in the hope of being able to stay and live here. Some of these young Muslims, they have all the stuff that this nation provides that those people are wanting. And they're prepared to chuck it in, travel across the world to a dangerous, deserted place where they're facing hardship, danger, probable death, and definitely not an easy life. Because, among other reasons, they see that the stuff that we have just does not provide that meaning and purpose. It's empty in itself. They go over there and they're looking for that meaning, for that real purpose. And they believe that's where they're going to find it. Because purpose and meaning are important to us. So what is the answer? Or what answers are we given? Looking first at atheism, or its sister philosophy, materialism. According to atheism, there is no purpose, no meaning, no point to existence. My life one day will end. And once my life has ended, it will be to me as if I had never existed. After I am dead, my experience will be exactly the same whether I had been born in the past or never been born in the past. And for eternity thereafter, I will experience and know absolutely nothing. And the universe itself will one day come to an end. And then it will be as if everything that had ever existed had never existed. The official term is heat death, where everything is just stable and there's nothing there, nothing happening. And for eternity thereafter, it will be as if the universe had never really existed or done anything. And in comparison to eternity, the entire perceived life of this universe is next to nothing. Now, as you are probably aware, I am not an atheist. So I don't want you to think this is just me trying to put something over onto atheism or to explain something that they wouldn't necessarily go along with. So I actually have quite a lot of quotes for this evening. This first one is from Bertrand Russell. He writes that man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. That all the labours of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. How is that for a foundation for life? Unyielding despair. And that is the firm foundation on which atheism is built. Now, I have for many years had a keen interest in science fiction. I have read many of the books of the science fiction masters from various times, from H.G. Wells and Jules Verne on through, and many others. I've also watched a number of science fiction movies, and I've seen virtually every episode of Doctor Who. In one episode of Doctor Who entitled Last of the Time Lords, the Master and his human wife capture the Doctor. The Master is the Doctor's arch enemy, and they catch him and take him prisoner as part of their nefarious scheme to take over the universe. And explaining to their prisoner, the Doctor, at one point, they're talking about when the Master had taken Lucy on a trip in the TARDIS millions or trillions of years into the future to the end of the universe. And so then in her words, trillions of years into the future, to the end of the universe, dying, everything dying, the whole of creation was falling apart. And I thought, there's no point. There's no point to anything. Not ever. Then the Master went on, "You should have seen it, Doctor. The last of humanity, screaming at the dark." That's where we're going. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Richard Dawkins is one of the current outspoken spokespeople for New Atheism. He is a scientist and a committed atheist, and an atheist evangelist, so to speak. He goes on, "We are machines built by DNA, whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA. That is exactly what we are here for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living." Which to me prompts the question, well, what's the point? Particularly with the next quote as well. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Seems rather exciting. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher, I know of no better life purpose than to perish in attempting the great and the impossible. No greater life purpose than to perish. That sounds good. And attempting the impossible, no greater life purpose than to perish in failure. I was kind of hoping for something a little bit more than that. The moment a man questions the meaning and value of life, he is sick, since objectively neither has any existence, wrote Sigmund Freud. No meaning, no purpose. The illusion of purpose and design is perhaps the most pervasive illusion about nature that science has to confront on a daily basis. Everywhere we look, it appears that the world was designed so that we could flourish. As a cosmologist, a scientist who studies the origin and evolution of the universe, I am painfully aware that our illusions, nonetheless, reflect a deep human need to assume that the existence of the earth, of life and of the universe, and the laws that govern it, require something more profound. For many, to live in a universe that may have no purpose and no creator is unthinkable. And Lawrence Krauss, as you're probably aware, is a prominent physicist these days and also a prominent spokesman for atheism. He is committed to atheism, and he is basically saying here that the universe appears very strongly, to all intents and purposes, as though it has been designed with a purpose. He also acknowledges, as I said before, that we all have this innate need for meaning and purpose. And yet, with that, he maintains that there is no meaning and purpose, that it is just an illusion. Conversely, Paul Davies, one-time professor of physics at Adelaide University, wrote, "Can a truly absurd universe so convincingly mimic a meaningful one?" To the best of my knowledge, Paul Davies falls into roughly the same camp as Lawrence Krauss. He is not a Christian of any sort, but nevertheless, he is prepared to ask these sorts of questions. He's not just a dogmatic in the same sense that someone like Dawkins and Krauss would be. Life has to be given a meaning because of the obvious fact that it has no meaning. And again, this fact that we have this innate need for meaning, the fact that the universe has no meaning means that we have to make one up for it, because we have to have a universe with meaning. We have to have meaning for ourselves. As far as we can tell from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan. And if planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow morning, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell at this point, human subjectivity would not be missed. Hence, any meaning that people inscribe to their lives is just a delusion, according to Yuval Noah. So, the official atheist answer is that there is no meaning and no purpose. They also acknowledge that we can't live with that. And so the small picture answer is that we create our own meaning. But that simply doesn't cut it. That answer appears good on the surface, but it doesn't really satisfy anyone. It's kind of like the idea of rising up into the air by grabbing our bootstraps and pulling. And we all know that doesn't work. And so creating our own meaning in that same sense just doesn't work. We all look to something greater to give us our meaning, be that education, some sporting club, and when there's a football game at Adelaide Oval, you can see the passion that goes with that. The army, communism, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, New Atheism, business, work. Something bigger than ourselves, something that we can throw ourselves into to hopefully give us some sort of meaning. Meaning and purpose, why I am here, has to come from outside of me. And when we look at the universe as a whole, It thus has to come from something outside of creation. In this universe, as we see it, as we understand it, there is no inherent meaning. We can't make our own meaning like that. The desire, the hunger, the need for meaning, for purpose in life, goes deep in all of us. We cannot live with the belief that life, or my life, is totally meaningless. My life lacks any purpose whatsoever. I am totally without significance. There is no point to anything I do. And even when an atheist acknowledges that this is fundamental to his worldview, he or she finds it impossible to live consistently with that belief. The only alternatives are suicide or insanity. Another program that I watched reasonably regularly some years ago was The Goodies. The Goodies was a British comedy show that had some really good bits and a lot of rubbish. It featured three people: Tim Brooke-Taylor, Bill Oddie and Graham Garden. And in one of their episodes, it was set on December the 31st of some unnamed year. And round about in the middle of the day, an official announcement came on the TV to say that all the governments of the world had gotten together and they had all agreed that life has no meaning. Everything is meaningless and pointless. There is no purpose to any of this. And so we've decided that at midnight GMT, every nuclear power is going to detonate all of their nuclear warheads and put an end to everything. It's the only logical conclusion to do. And so most of the rest of that program is taken up with people everywhere doing what people do when they know they've only got a few hours left before the end of the world, which means a whole lot of rubbish and whatever going on. And finally at the end of the program, the three guys get back together and they're sitting looking at the clock and they're watching it tick down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, midnight. And Tim and Bill yell and scream, and Graham laughs at them. Ha ha! I set the clock forward 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, kaboom, and that's the end of everything. So it's not just me saying this, that suicide, destroying, ending everything, is the logical conclusion to this worldview. The BBC said so. Other deep atheist thinkers have also said that suicide is the profound question that we've got to look at because it is the logical conclusion. Suicide or insanity. And from all reports, Friedrich Nietzsche, who I quoted earlier, chose option number 2, insanity. Now, I almost wasn't going to do this one, but I thought that fate and karma is quite popular in our culture these days. The idea that what comes round goes round, that if you do something wrong, karma will catch up with you. So just a brief mention. Fate or karma is basically an impersonal, unthinking force. And it gives localized appearance to purpose, but ultimately it goes nowhere. Buddhism. Buddhism ultimately also has no real purpose or meaning. And for Buddhism and Hinduism and the like, I'm not an expert on these things, so I've got some help from the internet. And Buddhism, being inherently atheistic, focuses more on the nature of things than their meaning or purpose. Meaning and purpose must be assigned by an external force. There's that same idea again there, either human or divine. Both such assignations are considered conventional constructs according to Buddhism. Even the 4 Noble Truths are called designations or conventions. This idea is quite clear throughout the Buddhist teaching, which is mostly concerned with describing the nature and interactions between realities, rather than ascribing a particular purpose or meaning to them. Even the so-called goal of Buddhism is simply the most reasonable logical choice. Given that all beings seek happiness, they should therefore rationally seek out freedom from suffering. What is the meaning of life, and where does this meaning come from? Meaning, according to Buddhism, must come from an external source and is artificial and relative. The only true meaning of life is, as was answered already, life. So life is the meaning of life, which doesn't really get us far. What is the purpose of life, and where does it come from? Purpose as well must come from an external source, though there is an argument to be made from logic and reason that a being wishing for happiness should take as their purpose the attainment of freedom from suffering. Life is full of suffering. It is inescapable. The ultimate purpose of life in Buddhism is to escape suffering. And I think in all the history of the earth, there has not been one person who has had a perfect life. Everyone who has ever lived, even those that have had the best possible life, have experienced suffering on more than one occasion. All of us here tonight, I'm sure we've all experienced suffering at various times in our lives, and we can all look forward to more suffering in the future. And that kind of makes this idea a bit appealing. To escape from suffering is something that does kind of gel with us. But as an ultimate meaning for life, an ultimate purpose, the purpose of life is to stop living. It doesn't really quite go very far. Hinduism. Thus far, everything we've looked at has more or less involved no gods. Hinduism, on the other hand, involves many gods. And once again, I could not find any ultimate purpose or meaning in Hinduism. Now, that kind of suggests that there are four meanings to life. Liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth is an ultimate end. Again, living to escape from life. This is often associated with achieving perfection and can also be considered as becoming God or a God through your own efforts. Moksha being the ultimate end. The four aspects and goals of human life are dharma, fulfilling one's purpose; artha, prosperity; karma, desire, sexuality, enjoyment; and moksha, enlightenment. And of course, all of these, we can see the appeal. But, yeah, not real sure. But Hinduism and Buddhism then lead into Nirvana. And I'm sure we've all heard of Nirvana. And I don't mean the American rock group from a few years back. Actually, when I went looking for information on Nirvana on the internet, I found lots and lots and lots about the American rock group. Never mind that minor detail. Nirvana in the Buddhist context. Nirvana refers to the imperturbable stillness of mind after the fires of desire, aversion and delusion have been finally extinguished. In Hindu philosophy, it is the union with Brahman, the divine ground of existence, and the experience of blissful egolessness. For Hindus, the attainment of nirvana is moksha. And so nirvana is the ultimate end that we're aiming for if we're Buddhist or Hindu. And I've also heard nirvana explained on a number of occasions as like a drop of water returning to the ocean. When a drop of water returns to the ocean, it totally loses itself. It no longer exists as a water droplet. Its constituent atoms still go on, but that water droplet ceases completely to exist. It is no more. And it kind of seemed to me that nirvana in its basic form is pretty similar to the concept of the heat death of the universe, in which we lose ourselves. Of course, in doing so, we escape suffering, but that's about it. I also mentioned in Hinduism that one of the ultimate goals is to escape the eternal cycle of life and rebirth. Now, for an atheist, as I said, suicide and death, that's the end. But if you believe in reincarnation, that just doesn't do it. It's going to take something a whole lot more and more complicated, more difficult to escape. Because if you commit suicide, you just come back again as someone else and you've got nowhere. Islam. Now, I really don't know Islam's idea of ultimate meaning or purpose in life. I would love to spend some time with a Muslim who knows what he's talking about to discuss this one. My impression at this stage from my researches is that this question is simply not addressed in Islam. However, some of what I could find on this includes the quotes that we have here. So what does the Creator, Allah, tell us about our purpose in life? Allah states in the Quran that He created man to be His Khalifa, His trustee on earth. Mankind's basic trust, our responsibility is to believe in and worship Allah. And I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me, it says in the Quran. Very simple. The purpose for man's creation is to worship the Creator. Allah further states that He has made this life in order to test man, so that every person may be recompensed after death for what he has earned. He who created death and life to test you as to which of you is best indeed, and he is the exalted in might, the forgiving. In the picture the Quran conveys about paradise in Surah 55, there is a place overflowing with sensual delights, material riches, but where Allah is not there. So there are some immediate answers. Our purpose is to worship. Creation is created to worship the Creator. But of course, if the Creator didn't create, then there would be no one to worship and it still wouldn't really matter either way. So there are immediate answers in Islam, but no big picture answers. No big answers. Why are we here? Why did Allah create? Ultimately, it is very hard to find any ultimate purpose and meaning for life in Islam. Christianity. And I do know a little bit more about Christianity. I've had quite a bit of experience with this one. According to Christianity, yes, there is a meaning for life. There is an answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. There is an answer to the question of why am I here? Why are we here? God loves you and wants you. God loves us and wants us. And basically, the answer to the question is summed up in the word relationship. It's more to which I'll come into briefly, but relationship encompasses our purpose in life. And one of the primary central doctrines of Christianity is the doctrine of the Trinity. And the doctrine of the Trinity is one which I think I can pretty safely say no one fully understands. But if you want a little bit more idea of what the Trinity is, how it works, bring it up in the discussion time afterwards and take it a little bit further. Basically, the idea of the Trinity says that there is one God, and this one God is made up of three persons. Each of them is God, but there's still only the one God. And that means that fundamentally, God is relationship. Fundamental to God's being, his nature, who he is relationship. And secondly, we have in the Christian scriptures the statement that God is love. And love, again, is a relational term. So, God is relationship. It's fundamental to his nature, to his being. Our purpose is relationship. Primarily relationship with God, because he created us for this reason. And secondarily, relationship with each other, since that naturally flows out of the first one. So the Christian answer, you are loved. If by no one else anywhere, you are loved by God. And so therefore you have significance. You are important to someone. And God, by very nature of being God, is greater than his creation. He created us for a reason, and therefore we have meaning because we have meaning to God. We have a purpose because he created us for a purpose. He created us for something. And we have value because he values us. On this earth, the greatest joy, the greatest fulfillment we find in our relationships. Think about it. What is more important to you? What makes your life mean something? Is it the stuff you've got, the things you've done, or the people who love you, the people you relate to? Think about the movies that are made. It is very difficult to find any movie that hasn't somewhere got something significant about relationships in it. Listen to the radio, listen to the music on the radio, and it's about relationships. It's what's important to people. And it is not those who take, those who get, those who live for themselves are the happiest. It's contrary to how we naturally think. It's counterintuitive, but it is those who give and who live for others who are the happiest, who find the greatest fulfillment in life. According to the Bible, God is here. He is Trinity. He is relationship. God does not need us for anything. If you go out and ask the average Christian on the street, if you can find an average Christian on the street, why did God create us? They'll probably say, because he needed us. But Christianity and Islam are 100% agreed on this particular point. God does not need us. God is totally self-sufficient in himself. He needs nothing. But love, relationship, wants to enlarge. I was hoping Amethyst and Rosalind would be back tonight so that I could point out, Rosalind, but we want children. Those of us who were parents knew before we became parents that babies and children are trouble. They're a pain, they cost a lot, they cause all sorts of difficulties. Sorry, John. It's not easy, but we want to. We want children, we love children. That's why the IVF industry is so big, because couples find themselves unable to have children. They're willing to go to great lengths to try and make it happen. Because children, family, growing relationships are important. That's what we want. And similarly with God. The ultimate end and purpose of our lives, from God's perspective, is for us to have an eternal, living, dynamic, loving, growing, fulfilling, joy-filled relationship with God himself. And each and every one of those adjectives is important. This is not a merging into God such that all individuality vanishes, like Nirvana. It is quite the opposite. Because if all individuality vanished, then that would defeat the whole purpose. Instead, as we join in this relationship with God, we truly become who we are. We truly live. And we live to give and live to love. What is the meaning of human life, or of organic life altogether? To answer this question at all implies a religion. Is there any sense, then, you ask, in putting it? I answer, the man who regards his own life and that of his fellow creatures as meaningless is not merely unfortunate, but almost disqualified for life. Albert Einstein. One of the greatest gifts that God gives each of us is the love we share with our family, friends, and fellow men. It is this divine gift of love that enriches us, gives meaning and purpose to life, and makes it all worth living. Everything else in life is secondary. Everything. And when our time here on earth is over, our lives will not be measured by the riches we accumulate, the honours we receive, the degrees we acquire, or the professional success we achieve, but by our capacity to love and be loved. So then, what are the implications of all this? What are the ramifications of the various worldviews? Because we live our lives in this world here and now. If we're a Christian, we might believe that our purpose is for eternity, but even so, that has to mean something for the here and now, because we are still living here and now. According to William Lane Craig, if God does not exist, then life is futile. If God does exist, then life is meaningful. And thus, what we do, how we live, has meaning. If the Christian God is, then the meaning and purpose it supposes impacts, or it should impact, how we live. Now, it just so happens, I mentioned before, that atheists find it impossible to live consistently with their worldview. I think we will find that virtually everybody fails to live up to the implications, ramifications of their worldview. And Christians, we fail. But the ramifications, the implications for how we live or how we should live involve love, truth, justice, right attitudes, respect for others, courtesy, consideration, kindness, love of the good and hatred of evil, implacable antagonism to all that harms and destroys and divides us. It must include the giving, building, reconciling, healing, and correcting the wrong. And we must also contribute and be a part of helping the poor, the downtrodden, the weak, the sick, the persecuted, the disabled, those caught by catastrophe and accident, and so on. And as I said, Christians fail to live up to this, and I'm sure just in this small group here we could come up with a multitude of examples where Christians have failed. Nevertheless, if you look around at the world, look at where these things in some measure exist, you'll find that in most cases, Christians have been responsible, or individuals or Christians who have been influenced by Christianity. This has had a significant impact on how many people have lived out their lives in this world. Coming again to quoting William Lane Craig, he says, "My claim is that if there is no God, then meaning, value and purpose are ultimately human illusions. They're just in our heads. If atheism is true, then life is really objectively meaningless, valueless and purposeless, despite our subjective beliefs to the contrary. There is no good or evil," and Richard Dawkins said that himself. "Wherever you go, whatever you do is ultimately neither here nor there. It matters naught. So do whatever you like. Do whatever feels good in your momentary existence, for soon it will be over. Or, to quote the old adage, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. There is no escape. There is no hope. We still have that firm foundation of unyielding despair." Back to Richard Dawkins again. "Nature is not cruel, only piteously indifferent. This lesson is one of the hardest for humans to learn. We cannot accept that things might be neither good nor evil, neither cruel nor kind, but simply callous, indifferent to all suffering, lacking all purpose." A couple of centuries before Christ, a book was written that was entitled Wisdom, Book of Wisdom. It's not part of our standard Christian Bible, but it is part of the Apocrypha, considered good, useful, worthwhile stuff. And I'd just like to read one chapter out of the Book of Wisdom that kind of shows that this idea isn't something new, something that's been cooked up in the last 20 years, but people have been thinking this way for a long time. And this is the false argument they use. Our life is short and dreary. There is no remedy when our end comes. No one is known to have come back from Hades. We came into being by chance, and afterwards shall be as though we had never been. The breath in our nostrils is a puff of smoke. Reason, a spark from the beating of our hearts. Extinguish this, and the body turns to ashes, and the spirit melts away like the yielding air. In time, our name will be forgotten. No one will remember what we have done. Our life will pass away like wisps of cloud, dissolving like the mist that the sun's rays drive away, that its heat dispels. For our days are the passing of a shadow. Our end is without return. The seal is affixed, and nobody comes back. Come then, let us enjoy the good things of today. Let us use created things with the zest of youth. Take our fill of the dearest wines and perfumes. On no account forego the flowers of spring, but crown ourselves with rosebuds before they wither. No meadow excluded from our orgy. Let us leave the signs of our revelry everywhere, since this is our portion, this is our lot. As for the upright man who is poor, let us oppress him. Let us not spare the widow, nor respect old age, white-haired with many years. Let our might be the yardstick of right, since weakness argues its own futility. Let us lay traps for the upright man, since he annoys us and opposes our way of life, reproaches us for our sins against the law, and accuses us of sinning against our upbringing. He claims to have knowledge of God and calls himself a child of the Lord. We see him as a reproof to our way of thinking. The very sight of him weighs down our spirits, for his kind of life is not like other people's, and his ways are quite different. In his opinion, we are counterfeit. He avoids our ways as he would filth. He proclaims the final end of the upright as blessed and boasts of having God for his Father. Let us see if what he says is true and test him to see what sort of end he will have. For if the upright man is God's son, God will help him and rescue him from the clutches of his enemies. Let us test him with cruelty and with torture, and thus explore this gentleness of his and put his patience to the test. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, since God will rescue him, or so he claims. This is the way they reason, but they are misled, since their malice makes them blind. They do not know the hidden things of God. They do not hope for the reward of holiness. They do not believe in a reward for blameless souls. For God created human beings to be immortal. He made them as an image of his own nature. Death came into the world only through the devil's envy, as those who belong to him find to their cost. Ultimately, we cannot prove God, and we cannot prove not God. We cannot prove that the existence of the universe is the product of an almighty creator, and we cannot prove that it is the self-created product of unthinking chance. We cannot prove the existence of an eternal being. We cannot prove the existence of an eternal non-personal matter, for example, some sort of eternal multiverse. If an eternal, omniscient, omnipotent, personal creator exists, only he can prove it. And if he decides to, it is not up to us to specify the how and the when, because he is God. In the meantime, it is up to us to choose what we want to believe, what alternative is most reasonable, and what alternative we most like. At Reasonable Faith Adelaide, we believe and seek to show, and for that matter to better learn, that the God hypothesis is both reasonable and the most reasonable given the evidence at our disposal. And it is also the only one that provides any meaning to existence. We would suggest that a life of meaning and purpose is immeasurably better and more desirable than one lacking these, than an existence that is ultimately totally pointless and temporary.